Jay here for Stretford Paddock, and this is the Tier 1 Transfer Podcast. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Ronaldo Brown. Ronaldo, how are we doing?
I'm good, just in a little bit of pain though, actually.
Wow.
Mentally and physically, because of Steve.
Stephen House.
Stretford Paddock FC's called.
Seriously, man. Stretford Paddock FC, that's all I ever hear about. Never mind about that. Are they Tier 1? Have you got any Tier 1 news for me about Stretford Paddock FC?
There is a little bit.
There isn't, there really isn't. Is Ronaldo talking about in Stretford Paddock FC? No, he's not.
He might do.
What is he talking about, though?
He's talking about Chelsea and the Havertz deal that we've been speaking about for the past few weeks now, and it's not making any more progression. But
right, before we get to that though, we have, because one of the stories that sort of broke about Manchester United this week was David Brooks from Bournemouth being linked with us, which was a bit of a surprise, if we're being honest. I don't think any of us saw that one coming. So we thought, who better to speak to about the David Brooks deal than someone who covers Bournemouth? So we spoke to Peter Rutzler from The Athletic. So we're going to be speaking to him a little bit later on. We're going to have that interview up a little bit later on. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But before we get to Peter Rutzler, and David Brooks, what have you got for me about Romano? You said the Havertz to Chelsea deal. What's going on there?
Obviously, there's been a little bit of development now. On Monday, they've actually made direct contact. Apparently, there's been talk of it being like an €85 million or pound bid, etc. But I don't know if that's just a rumour mill or whether that's legit. But Romano has said they have made contact, and there's actually been like a 20 million difference between the two in terms of the fee. And obviously, by actually holding out by Leverkusen, holding out for a little bit more. But Chelsea
playing hardball. These German clubs, they're not messing about. I'll tell you what.
Romano did say that when he came on the podcast. Remember to check out that podcast. Actually, it's still up. But anyway, I'll plug that. But Romano did say when it comes to German clubs, it can be a little bit difficult, and they very much have the mindset of we don't need to sell, which is it can be a bit stringent, but
they're all well run out of German
very well
clubs.
Run.
They tend to be in a position of strength. They're not in a position where it's like we've got to sell this player quickly or we're going to go under. And it doesn't matter whether it's Dortmund, Bayer Leverkusen or any other club. The by and large German clubs. Yeah,
following on from it,
tend to be sort of.
We've seen we've been seeing it. Sorry, Jay. We've seen it with every single deal. How they've kind of like every club's been basically throwing out the add-ons kind of perspective, because it feels like no one's got enough money to pay it straight because of the COVID and the pandemic situation that we have now. But that's what Chelsea are trying to do with this. They're trying to basically tease the add-ons situation to Leverkusen to see if they'll bite on it. But if the German clubs are anything to go by, they may not. But what do you think about it, Jay? I know. I know
I know about Havertz is what you tell me. He's obviously a very good player, and it does worry me a little bit that Chelsea are buying these players. You know, they've already spent big in the transfer market. The shackles are off with the transfer ban when that got ended. I know it got ended during last season, but they are going big. City are going big as well. And I know you have to focus on Manchester United and what we're doing, but you don't want to see your rival strengthen whilst you're not, whilst you're still kicking around with the Jadon Sancho deal, which unfortunately, you know, we sort of talk about a lot, but we have to because it's still being mentioned. It's still going. So negotiations are still ongoing. We're still waiting to hear any news. We're still waiting for those 3 magic words from Romano of "here we go." We haven't heard them yet.
It's like, that's what I'm saying. It's like every other club's kind of making moves.
While we're on Romano, because he's like the sort of the go-to guy for a lot of these transfers. He's also talking about Gabriel Magalhaes, who United have been linked with. Now, it did look like he was going to go to, was it Arsenal at one point?
Yeah.
And then there's a sort of back and fro going on with. Romano says that Magalhaes is the main target for Napoli if they sell Koulibaly to City. And also, what he said in one of his tweets, that Manchester United only contacted Magalhaes' agents a few days ago.
Yeah.
So it seems like we're a bit late to the party there, and if we do want him, why are we only doing it a few days ago when other clubs are making these moves and putting in more concrete offers?
When Arsenal are being a little bit more active than you in the transfer window, that's when you know you've got to be a little bit worried.
That's when you've hit rock bottom, when Arsenal are sort of leaving you in their wake. When we spoke to James Cooper a few weeks ago, he did say that he expects 3 signings this summer, and you would expect one of those signings for Manchester United, and you would expect one of those signings to be a centre-back. Just on Koulibaly as well, it does look like the interest from City is real. You know, that Pep wants another centre-back. I mean, that'd be a good player if they got him as well, wouldn't it?
Great player.
Romano was mentioning that as well. That, you know, if they got him, you know, that's they're setting the stall out quite strongly, aren't they?
That was literally the only difference really between them and Liverpool, was basically defensively. They're just a little bit more shaky. They didn't really replace Company. And obviously there's a bit of a gap between us and City as it is right at the moment. And if you've seen the likes of Koulibaly and that kind of pedigree of player possibly making their way to City as well, it can possibly widen the gap. And that's why we need to get moving, man. We're stalling, and all we're doing is coming on here, we're watching.
Come on,
coming on here, Jay, watching all the other clubs.
See, I don't mind if we stall, if we get the deals we want to get done, eventually. It's just when nothing's happening, you start getting a little bit frustrated. One player we were linked with, or we have been linked with as well, is Barcelona's Ousmane Dembele. And the Barcelona president has ruled out opening talks. A few Tier 1 journalists reported this, that he's saying that's not happening. Romano mentioned it in a tweet, that he's saying that he's going to stay here, that Dembele's going to stay. Does that bother you? Is he someone you're keen on? If that is true, or you're not bothered?
I don't know. Obviously, he was a talented player. He is possibly a talented player, but he's just been frail, man. He's been a sick bed. Frail, man. Sick bed. Obviously, I remember highlights of it. I remember World Cup. I'm not sure if it was World Cup. It might have been just a game between France and England where we know how quick Kyle Walker is, and Dembele absolutely burnt him, and that was kind of him thinking, wow, this guy's got wheels, and he's obviously got talent, but we're yet to see it. And I don't know whether, because when players go to Barcelona and don't do well, you don't know whether it's down to actually them or just the way that the club's run. It's a difficult club to play for, isn't it?
It's weird, isn't it? Because you look at Alexis Sanchez. I know he was a disaster at Manchester United, but he went from Barcelona to Arsenal and did well at Arsenal, did very well at Arsenal, hence the reason we wasted a lot of money on him with his wages. But sometimes, the expectation of Barcelona, the general feeling at the club, it can overall a lot of very good players who can go on and have a great career and a great spell elsewhere. I don't know a lot about Dembele. I just remember him missing sitters against the Scousers, which stayed with me. That
has stayed with me.
I am that bitter.
Was it the one at 4-0 where he could have put it
3-0, it would have made it 4-0, and that would have probably been the tie over at the Camp Nou for the.
And he passed it back.
Messi laid it almost on a plate for him, and it didn't happen. But you can't judge a player on a 5-minute cameo against Liverpool. So we'll wait and see what happens. It looks like it might be a little bit dead in the water, that one. You've been doing a bit of translating, haven't you, as well? You've had it's a good job you're fluent in French.
No, it's not. I think I got E or something in high school, but my French ain't really there.
Go on. Who have you been translating, and what they've been saying?
Mohamed Boufazi. I think I've pronounced his name wrong every single video, so I think that should be alright. We'll check that.
Pronunciation arguments.
Mohamed Boufazi is the name, and he's basically suggested that Gabriel was basically Arsenal in pole position.
Yeah.
But Napoli are basically still what we've just reiterated before, the go-to club for him, and then obviously the player actually has to make his decision fairly soon on whether he actually would prefer Napoli or Arsenal. So I think it's actually hotting up with Gabriel a little bit.
If he does go Arsenal now, you're never going to end of it from Gooners. They'll be like, oh, he wants to be part of Arteta's project. Well, it'll be money talks, and I don't know a lot about that, but it's probably, if Arsenal offer him more money, I'm guessing he'll probably go there. Whereas if Napoli do, he'll probably end up at Napoli. But
the interesting part of that is Mohamed Boufazi saying that the price tag looks to be around 30 million euros, which looks a bit cheap. Looks very cheap.
Decent, doesn't it, for a player who's so highly rated and coveted by a lot of the top clubs, including Manchester United, who apparently have come late to the party with that one. So if you're spending 30 million euros on a defender, that's not that much in the current climate. I know we've got the pandemic and everything, so money is a little bit tighter than it usually is, but it's still, in the grand scheme of things, 30 million euros. It's not too bad, is it?
It's not, especially when obviously I threw the statistic in the group chat yesterday about Harry Maguire.
What's the statistic?
He's priced.
Go on.
that he cost. Harry Maguire on his own cost the same as the whole Bayern starting 11 last night.
I saw that.
That is insane, man.
On Twitter, and I've seen it lots of places, including, as you mentioned, in the group chat.
And
but
it's quite scary.
I mean, what do you do with that information? It's almost meaningless in a way, because it's like, well, Bayern Munich have obviously got a lot of bargains, and they've got some very good players for very low prices.
It was interesting watching Bayern yesterday as well, because even when Coleman came on, I was quite impressed with him. And I was thinking, if he actually came, he'd very much suit. Because
he's a player he was linked with, when we spoke to Andy Mitten, not on this podcast but on another one, and he said that there was interest in Coleman from Manchester United, but again it was almost like a Sancho alternative rather than.
I feel like he's a good alternative from what I've seen. He's still a young man. He's won a lot. He looked sharp yesterday, so when he came on, so don't know. But obviously, we still want
talking of
the main man.
We want the main man,
yeah.
Jadon Sancho. And talking of him, James Ducker from the Telegraph, he was quoting I think it was a Dortmund CEO, saying that it's set in stone, quote, that Sancho will stay. But I mean, I think it was Owen Hargreaves that claimed there's a bit of bluffing there going on, and so no, we've heard these statements from the Dortmund camp in the past, and we've heard like Michael Zorc saying there was a deadline, and now obviously the CEO Watzke saying that it's set in stone. We all know, I think we know, don't we, that if Manchester United do pay the money that Dortmund want, and they pay it in a way that Dortmund are happy with, Jadon Sancho comes. I don't personally put much weight in these statements from the Dortmund camp, do you?
No, I think if you slap 120 mil on the table, they're taking it and running. So
slap that 120 mil on the table. Yeah, we can't argue with that.
That's basically that's the bottom line. That's just how it has been for the past fortnight. If we pay, we get him. If we don't, then we don't get him. Simple as.
It's that simple. It sounds. He's broke it down, but
it sounds oversimplified, but that's basically it.
We don't need to complicate it any more than that. If we slap the money on the table, we get Jadon Sancho, and if we don't get him, there you go, Ronaldo. Yeah, we're just breaking it down in pretty simple terms.
They're not accepting the add-ons. They're not going to accept any of that.
They don't want it over. It's not like a Wonga loan or whatever it is. They're just trying to do. I think they want to. It's not like when Arsenal bought Pepe, didn't it? I think they're paying it off till 2034 or something stupid.
And that's how his performances have been like as well. But
fine talk. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show, we were linked. Manchester United have been linked with David Brooks from Bournemouth. So we spoke to Peter Rutzler from The Athletic, who covers all things AFC Bournemouth, and here's what he had to say about David Brooks and whether he thinks he'll come to Old Trafford. Peter, thanks for chatting to us today.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
Not at all. Now, as I said earlier, the news that David Brooks had been linked to United came as a bit of a shock to many United fans. Don't think most of us were expecting it. What did you make of it when you heard these sort of stories or these reports coming out that United could be looking at him?
I wasn't too surprised, to be honest. I think the thing with David is he's been, injured for the past year pretty much. He returned after lockdown, after what was over 12 months out injured. So he's sort of fallen out of everyone's memory a little bit. Everyone's sort of forgotten about the player he is. He was signed from Sheffield United in the summer of 2018-19, and really hit the ground running last season, almost unexpectedly. I don't think anyone here expected him to do as well as he did. Then he picked up an ankle injury last summer in pre-season, and we haven't really seen him since. So, and yeah, I can see why there'd be a bit of surprise from United fans with the links, and especially with all the talk about Jadon Sancho at the moment. But, he's a top player. He's really highly rated. Ryan Giggs thinks very highly of him in the Wales camp as well. So it's not too surprising that there are those links. But it's whether he can make that leap, I think, will be interesting if there's anything to it.
Is he I mean, you sort of answered this, but I'll sort of delve a little bit deeper. Is he a player you'd expect a lot of clubs to be looking at, other clubs, other Premier League clubs or other top clubs to be looking at?
Yeah, I think so. Because of how quickly he adapted to the Premier League. Now, he burst onto the scene at Sheffield United, did very, very well there under Chris Wilder, and Bournemouth signed him for about 11.5 million roughly, which seemed like a big fee for a Championship player. And I don't think there was any expectation that he would be as important as he became to Bournemouth. That last season, 2018-19 here, I'm talking about, Ryan Fraser was the standout player for Bournemouth. His goals and his assists were superb. I think only Eden Hazard made more assists than he did. But on the opposite side, David Brooks was the perfect sort of antidote to him. They complemented each other really, really well. And Bournemouth have really struggled in his absence. And I think that in itself is quite indicative of just how important he's been. He's a counter-attacking player. He's very good in transition. He likes to cut in from the right-hand side, play centrally. And I think when you have a player who can cut in from the right-hand side, they tend to have a little bit more of a premium to them. And because of that form in his first season, I think he scored 7 goals and got 5 assists, which isn't bad for a mid to lower table Premier League side. So, that interest is always going to be there. I just think in his case, because of his injury and because he hasn't had that second season or been able to play for so long, it's just whether there's going to be that willingness to take almost a risk, really, to see how he's going to be after his injuries.
What would you feel would be like a good player comparison for David Brooks?
It's a difficult one. I think he's quite a unique player. You know, he's very good in transitions. He can be that out-and-out winger, and he's technically very good. He's very, very skillful as well. He was actually in the youth academy at Manchester City, and they let him go for being too slight, I think. He just never was able to push into that next bracket, you know, the talent that they brought in at that level. But speaking to some of the coaches around there, and there was a sense now that he's almost like, not quite a David Silva. He used to play centrally, and he does play centrally. He's quite effective in that almost advanced midfielder role. I think Eddie Howe told me earlier this season he thinks he could even play as a number 8, which sort of shows his versatility from being a winger to playing centrally. But they, not quite a David Silva, but more like a Phil Foden, and playing in that similar sort of style. Very quick, very agile, but also one of the key things that defines a Bournemouth winger is their work rate going backwards. You know, he's a very hard worker. Defensively, I wouldn't say he's an outstanding defender, but he's but that work rate, that willingness to cover his fullback, and then also to be so effective in transition. He's a really good counter-attacking player. I think if Foden was more of a counter-attacking player, he'd sort of fit that sort of similar sort of mould, or combining elements of a Dan James, I think.
You mentioned there that he's had injuries. We can see, just even if we don't know a lot about him, you can see from his appearance record he's obviously had injury issues this past season. How much of a sort of concern do you think his fitness is? Do you think he's just been unlucky, or is there a worry there that it could be something more serious?
I think he's been very unlucky, actually. It was in pre-season last year. He was tackled, I think it was against Brentford. It's quite late in the game, and it just seemed like an innocuous ankle knock, like an ankle roll. He was out for 3 months, and just as he was making his return, he picked up another knock, and it was almost it was a complication with that first injury. He had to have surgery on it, and that took a while for him to recover. And he was back amongst the first team by March, but of course by the time he came back, we were all entering lockdown. So I wouldn't say there's any sort of long-standing issue there. He's never really had that, but by the same token, we haven't really seen a full professional season from him, really, and that goes back to his time at Stretford United. So I think that's one thing that I think potential suitors would want to see, and that's probably something that maybe would make them more hesitant just to step back and say, right, how's he going to cope? Is he going to be able to pick up that same form again when he comes back, before making a bigger step up like once United?
Yeah, you spoke about how good of a season, a bit of a breakout season he had last season with 7 goals and 5 assists. How much of a difference do you think he would have made to Bournemouth season this season if he actually stayed fit?
Oh, massive. Absolutely massive. It's I think it's difficult to underestimate that. I mean, Ryan Fraser, on the one side, he had issues with his contract, and those sort of off-the-field distractions really affected him. And they didn't really have an alternative. Harry Wilson came in and did fill the void in terms of goals, but what they really missed was Brooks' creativity. Bournemouth had become quite a counter-attacking team, especially in the last couple of seasons, very effective in those transitions. And Brooks coming into that was so good at taking advantage of teams, capitalising on space, bringing the team forward, carrying the ball well. And as I said earlier, he's very good working the other way. And Eddie Howe always placed the premium on that with his wingers. He wanted them to work well, to combine well with their fullbacks. And Bournemouth missed that. They desperately missed that. Creativity was the big issue this year. And missing a player of Brooks' calibre was huge. And I think even after lockdown, because he spent so long out, he just was not able to regain that match sharpness quickly. It's so difficult when you spend that kind of time period away from the game. So, but again, you could see the flashes, the little glimpses of his quality. And it was just a case of really finding that again and getting that rhythm back for him.
Yeah, we've also seen how basically Bournemouth have lost out on Ake and Ramsdale so far this transfer window, and obviously you got the speculation surrounding Brooks as well. Do you think the fact that they've already lost 2 players like that might make him a little bit more reluctant to let Brooks go?
Absolutely, I think so. I think the one thing Bournemouth have been quite firm about is they don't see there being a fire sale. New manager Jason Tindall came out and said, I've been reassured that won't be the case. And, from the first few weeks, I think fans would be thinking, hold on, everyone's going out the door here. But there's a real sense of trying to keep as much of this young squad together as possible. They really want to bounce back at the first time of asking next season. They've got a good young core to the squad. And Brooks, of course, is one of their best assets. And if they were to lose him, they wouldn't let him go on the cheap. I think a lot of concern, performance relegation, concern their financial position, and then you couple that with COVID and everything else and the impact of that. And what's sort of become apparent is the owner's commitment has been very strong. They've already brought in £60 million this summer. So that immediate shortfall, coupled with parachute payments and things like that, means they're actually in quite a decent position, and they won't necessarily need to sell. And they're very keen to make sure that they can keep that squad together if they can. Whether they're able to do that, of course, is a different thing. Especially with a player like Brooks, who is playing for Wales, will want to be in the Premier League side, and has the potential to play at a higher level.
The sort of the fee being quoted is roughly around the £40 million mark, which I know you mentioned that they paid around £11 million for him, and he has shown what he can do in the Premier League. But some may feel that's quite excessive. Do you think that's about right for his price? Do you think he's worth it, or do you think that's maybe a little bit over the odds?
It's very difficult in the current market to probably add a value to that, and I wonder what it would be if Bournemouth was still in the Premier League and we'd had a few more games under his belt. And I would say it wouldn't actually be an unfair valuation. However, that's we're in different times now, and I can see that's almost as if almost like a line in the sand for Bournemouth, as if to say it's a pointer. This is the kind of fee that it would take to prize him away from the club. I think he has the potential to be worth that. I think he has the potential to be worth a lot more than that. Of course, it's, as I say, you've had that 12-month period without him playing, and there's all that little bit of uncertainty about how he would step up again to that next level, that top 6 sort of level. So maybe that's definitely on the high side. There's no doubt about that. But I think depending on if he's able to play those, if he were to go now, I don't think he'd probably see him leave for that much money. I think that would be almost too much for him. But if you gave him another 6 months and he's able to show the exact same electric form, I think he can be worth that, if not more.
Good stuff. Just finally, Peter, I mean, it almost goes without saying this, but I'll ask it you anyway, because when we were linked with Brooks, when all the Sancho stuff's going on, a lot of United fans start panicking. But it's pretty safe to say that if we were to go for Brooks and get him, this wouldn't be a deal you'd expect instead of Jadon Sancho by any stretch.
No. I think Jadon Sancho's in that next bracket. He's already got that European experience. He's a top elite end now. Brooks is a really confident character. He's got real self-belief, and that's so important for a player who wants to play at the highest level. And I don't think all the shadow of Sancho, if you wanted to call it that, would really affect him too much. I think he'd have enough belief in himself to really push on. But he's not that same category yet. And I use yet because we've seen glimpses that suggest he could be. But it's hard, but we still need to see that on a more consistent basis. Injury, of course, played a part. But also see him tested at that high standard. And maybe that would mean sort of a middle rung now would be would be a better suit for him. Your Leicester sort of level. I think Leicester would be an ideal sort of club for him at this point. But then moving further forward, longer term, next couple of years, and if he's able to show the talent he did display in that first season for Bournemouth, there's no doubt he could be at that level, I think.
Do you definitively think United are in for Brooks? Or basically, how valid do you think the speculation is? And how likely do you think it will actually happen?
I'm not as convinced by the speculation, I don't think. I was a little bit surprised by it. Not completely surprised by it, but I think United will be watching him. I think he'll be one that most top clubs will be watching. But no, I don't think that's one that will happen this summer, from what I'm hearing anyway.
Peter, thanks a lot for chatting to us. It's been really good to talk to you and get the lowdown out of a player that most of us didn't know a lot about, if we're being brutally honest, before our conversation. So thanks for speaking to us.
No worries. Thanks for having me, guys.
So a couple of things there. I mean, he sort of, after we spoke quite a lot about Dave Brooks, he mentioned there at the end that he's quite sceptical at this deal, whether he thinks this deal will happen. He doesn't see it happening. He'd be surprised if it did. But if it were to happen, he says there's a very good player there. He's just been a bit unlucky with injuries. So what did you make of that? Do you think that David Brooks could be a squad player if we were to get him? Is it someone you look at, or do you think with the way the money is, we shouldn't be spending that amount of money on a player who isn't going to come into the first team and has some question marks around him?
If he's got question marks, obviously, and he's had 2 ankle operations and 12 months out, as he's just said, it's a big gamble. And if you want to pay 40 million on him to be a squad player, it's just, especially with the current climate, with how the finances are working out and the pandemic, I'm not sure that I'm completely on board with that kind of deal at all. Especially if you're not completely convinced by him. He's obviously got talent and he's got a bit of potential, but from where we are now and where we want to get to, we need to look him bigger than David Brooks.
I mean, we sort of did this last season with Dan James, didn't we? It was a lot cheaper than the price being quoted for David Brooks. Dan James obviously cost £12 million. And there's still question marks about Dan James, if we're being honest. But you look at that and you go, well, even if Dan James doesn't work out and he does end up leaving Old Trafford in the next couple of years, it wasn't a massive gamble to pay £12 million for a player.
Yeah.
Where if you're going to spend 40 million, if it happens, of course, lots of ifs and buts as always. Pressure, but if you are going to spend 40 million, that's a big chunk, especially if it's a player who
big chunk
you're not sure about.
Obviously, with James being the small price that he's talking about, he didn't really have much pressure on him, and it's not when he kind of outperformed his price tag to begin with. So basically he didn't have the pressure, but then he put the pressure on himself with how he was performing.
Everyone got overly excited, didn't they, with those early goals against
to keep it up.
Chelsea and Palace, and everyone was like, "That's it now." He's
He might have burnt out a little bit though.
And I've always felt sorry for Dan James. I know he had a lot of, he lost his dad and he came to Old Trafford and, as you said, got some early goals, and then the expectation was, oh no, he's not a squad player, he's in the first team. Played a lot of football, had a bit of a loss of form in the middle of the season, but as a squad player, I'm hoping that there's still a player there for Manchester United. But yeah, in terms of Brooks, I mean, it does seem a sort of a potential deal or an interest that is fraught with issues there.
It's an interesting player comparison that he gave Phil Foden.
Yeah.
It's a bit.
I mean, settle for that. He's
talented boy, was still a youngster in it. Yeah.
He came through that.
You said you've not watched Brooks, David Brooks.
I've seen a couple. I'll be honest with you. He's not a player that's stuck in my memory. He's not someone when I have watched him.
Do you know who he reminds me of?
But I've not seen a lot of him.
He reminds me a little bit of Januzaj, a little bit when I've watched him.
I don't know if that.
I don't know if that's
not the best compliment.
But Januzaj had a bit of ability, but it could just be the same mode way. Don't know if he applies it, but they look kind of similar in style.
Januzaj had that again. It's a bit similar to Dan James. He burst on the scene 2 goals away at Sunderland under Moyes, and that chant that did everyone's head in. But everyone was like, "Yeah, this is it," and then he just didn't do a lot over the next sort of year and a half, whatever it was, 2 seasons. Yeah. So it's one to keep an eye out as always, and if we do hear anything from the Tier 1 journalists out there talking about David Brooks or anything else, we will obviously keep you updated on the Tier 1 podcast. So don't forget to hit like, share and subscribe. Big thanks to Peter Rutzler as well for coming on the channel and keeping us updated about David Brooks. I've been Jay, that's been Ronaldo. This has been the Tier 1 Transfer Podcast. Thanks for watching.